Hi guys, this is Ariana. I'm filming my May wrap up, which is crazy. I read 11 books this month, and I don't know how, but I did. So we're going to talk about all of them from varying degrees of detail, and it's going to be a good time, and I'm really excited to talk to you about all these books. The first book I read this month was Emperor of All Maladies, a biography of cancer by Mukherjee Siddhartha, and I'm sorry if I said that wrong. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. So, a biography of cancer explores what cancer is, how cancer is treated, from a long-range historical perspective, from ancient times up to the modern day and how we treat cancer now, looking at both a scientific history as well as a personal biography, in that it looks at the clinicians, the researchers, and the patients that have all worked with or had cancer. So this book is very interesting and very informative, and I really loved the level of care and carefulness that was put into this book to ensure that it is respectful, poignant, informative, and very well researched. However, the one thing with this book is that it is very, very dense, so if you're not looking for a dense book on cancer, this is not a recommended read for you. He goes into the cell biology and the pharmacology of cancer and how it is treated. And so this is not a book for someone who just wants a light skim. It's also, I believe, 600 pages. So if you are not interested in that sort of commitment, I wouldn't recommend this book for you. Though I do recommend this on a whole for someone who's interested in learning more about cancer from a historical perspective. Because you can tell that he is a clinician and an oncologist because of the level of emotion that is put into this book, and I really did enjoy reading it, even though it was very challenging. Don't underestimate that. The second book I read was Down Girl: The Logic of Misogyny by Kate Manne. I give this 3.75 stars. So Down Girl is a very engaging and philosophical look at the inner workings of misogyny from a modern perspective. Kate Manne is a philosopher, so if you aren't looking for something that's very philosophical, this isn't the book for you. The thing for me is I thought this book was very well done, very well written, and very well argued, but as someone with no history or background in philosophy, I found it to be incredibly difficult to read. I found Emperor of All Maladies to be much easier to read than this book is, just because of the language used in The Logic of Misogyny. I wouldn't recommend this book for casual readers. But if you're interested in looking at a more academic dissection of misogyny, this book is definitely for you. The third book I read this month was my favorite book of the month, but it was a reread, so I knew it was going to be awesome. And that was The Tale of the Dueling Neurosurgeons by Sam Kean. I love this book. It's awesome. It's great. I gave it 5 stars. So, aside from me espousing how much I love it, The Tale of the Dueling Neurosurgeons is looking at a history of our understanding of the brain and the central nervous system. So it's looking at a history of neuroscience, essentially. It's really awesome. It gets into more of the biological side of psychology and the neuroscience itself, and looks at the history of the researchers and the patients that helped bring about scientific discoveries about how our brain and our nervous system work. As a psychology major who loves brains, this book is really good for me because it kind of gets into the history of how all this research is done. But for a layperson who isn't super into that world of neuroscience and neuropsychology, I would still highly recommend it because Sam Kean does an amazing job of explaining concepts in a way that's accessible for those who don't know anything about it, but also really, really interesting and engaging for people like me who do have a okay grasp of how the brain works, neurons work, etc. I would recommend all of Sam Kean's books because they're all great that I've read, and he's awesome, and I love his books. Read it. It's great. The fourth book I read in May was The Red Word by Sarah Henstra. This is a adult literature book exploring the collision of fraternities and rape culture with a group of feminists, I believe in the 80s. and it's fictional, but it takes a really deep look into this cultural clash and the flaws that both groups have and the incredibly important things that both groups value, and explores how those two groups meet and intersect through the eyes of Karen, a student who moves in with a bunch of very ardent feminists while dating a frat boy. And it's really interesting, and I love how gender politics are explored and how feminism engages with the rest of the world, because it's done really well through a critical eye. It looks at the positives and the negatives of both sides, and it does so through actually looking at a lot of classics, Greek and Roman classics, to kind of explore how those things intersect. I would say that with a red word, it is a very mature book, so if you're not interested in some more mature concepts, I wouldn't recommend it, as there are triggers for drug use, explicit sexual scenes, and sexual assault. So if you're not comfortable with that, please don't read this book, because you will have issues with it. The next book I read in May was a bit of a disappointment, and it was Heartless by Marissa Meyer. This was my first Marissa Meyer book, and so I'd heard good things about her, and so I thought I'd give her a try, and I didn't like it. I gave Heartless 2.5 stars. So Heartless is a prequel of sorts to Alice in Wonderland, as it follows the Queen of Hearts before she is the Queen of Hearts. She's Lady Catherine of Pinkerton, and she wants to be a baker, but her parents have told her that she has to go marry someone rich, and so it looks like it will be the king, and it's sold like that. The main problem I had with this book was not so much the plot. The plot was fine. I found the writing style to be incredibly juvenile. It just felt like I was reading a middle grade book, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it was talking about marriage and all of these like young adult topics, and it felt like I was reading from the perspective of like a 12-year-old, and that was annoying to me, as well as I just found the writing to be very unsubtle. So that was a problem for me. The other problem I had with this book is that it used the trope of like, oh, a girl wants to go off and do something, but her parents just want her to get married. And I have nothing wrong with that trope, per se. I just struggled with the fact that she didn't do anything with the trope. She just said, oh, this girl wants to do something different, but her parents say she has to go get married, and she doesn't want to. What is she going to do? And I just didn't find it was utilized and played with very much. It was just, this is the trope, it's happening. And that was annoying to me, especially since it's a pretty common trope right now that everybody's using to try to create conflict in their books, and so that really did annoy me. The next book I read this month was Inferior: How Science Got Women Wrong, the new research that's rewriting the story by Saini Angela. Hope I said that right. So I gave this book 4 stars. So this book basically just looks at the science of gender differences and sex differences, and how gender is a social thing, sex is more biological, and all that. It was fine. The research was really well done. You could tell that a lot of thought and time had gone into making sure that the data was shown, and that the stories behind how all this research had been done have been laid out quite clearly for lay audiences who don't know a lot about how science is done. And so that was really good. There's nothing wrong with the book. I just wanted more. This book is barely 200 pages, and so I would have enjoyed it more, I think, if she spent more time on it and didn't just hand us facts, or even just gave us more chapters, because I really loved everything that was there, but she just didn't give us enough. I wanted more from it, and we didn't get it, and so that was a bit annoying to me, but I really enjoyed it, so I was just like, so I gave it 4 stars. Maybe we shouldn't give it 3.5. I'm not sure, but it was good. I'd recommend it as more of an intro book to looking at the science of how research is done on gender and sex. The next book I read this month was Circe by Madeline Miller. I really enjoyed this book. I give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. So this novel explores the life of Circe, and if you don't know who that is, it's the daughter of the Greek titan Helios and a nymph, And so it talks about how Circe doesn't have all these fancy powers like the Titans do, or the Olympians do, like Zeus and all those people. She's has witchcraft powers, and so it looks at how Titans and Olympians view her as dangerous, and so when some stuff happens, I won't say a lot because I think this book is good not knowing a lot about what happens. She's sent away to live on an island by herself, and then as she goes through her immortal life, she meets a bunch of really interesting Greek gods, heroes, characters who are more ambiguous, and it explores a lot of really interesting topics like motherhood, what it means to be mortal and immortal. It looks at how power can be utilized for good and for evil. If you're if you're really into Greek myth, I would really highly recommend this book because it's done really, really well. You get to see lots of really interesting characters that if, like me, you grew up maybe like reading Percy Jackson and now you're graduated to more adult Greek stories, this is definitely for you because you meet Prometheus, you meet Hermes, you meet Daedalus, Odysseus, I'm forgetting his name, Jason and Medea, they're in this book as well. So if you're really interested in looking at how all of these Greek myths can be explored and looked at from a more modern lens, while still being set in ancient times, I highly recommend this book. I loved this book. Madeline Miller has lovely lyrical writing, and she approaches the idea of a flawed, human yet immortal protagonist from a really delightful lens because you can see the complexity of her struggles, her insecurities, and I cannot recommend this book more. It's not my favorite book ever, that's why this book isn't a 5 stars, but I did love this book. It was really, really good, and aside from The Tale of the Dueling Neurosurgeons, it was probably my favorite book this month. The next book I read was a poetry collection, actually. I read The Dark Between Stars by Atticus. I gave this book 3 stars. So I don't read a ton of poetry. I read it occasionally. I've read a little bit of modern poetry, just really Milk and Honey and all that sort of stuff. I found this book to be okay. I was nothing was wrong with the poetry. I didn't feel like really emotionally connected to probably 90% of the poems. There's a couple really good ones, but this is mostly love poetry, so if you're not really into love poetry, this might not be for you. It was good. It was fine. I listened to it on audiobook. It took me like 45 minutes. It was good. The next book I read in May was a bit more problematic. So I read Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey, and I gave this book 2.5 stars. So this is an old book. It was written, I can't remember, a while ago. It's like 40 plus years old. And so it's one of the original dragon sci-fi fantasy books, and so you can see a lot of the stuff that's done in Aragon. A lot of that is found in this book in similar ways, if you know what I mean. So in this book, The World of Pern, there are these dragon riders who ride dragons and they're bonded to dragons, and then every 50-ish years or so, this spore thing comes down onto the planet, and so they have to ride these dragons to destroy the spores because otherwise all the plant growth will die. But it has been almost 200 years since there was any of this plant growth happening, and so people have just kind of given up on dragons, and so we follow this main character, Lessa, as she gets a dragon and things ensue. I had a bunch of problems with this book. First off, it really wasn't copy edited very well. There was a lot of grammar mistakes, and it was annoying. I can handle it sometimes, but there was a lot of mistakes, and it was annoying me. I read better stuff from high school students, and so that annoyed me a lot, and it detracted from what I could have enjoyed in the book. So aside from all the grammar issues and the abruptness, the way it was written, it was a problematic book with problematic gender relations, I would say, for our current stance, and it was just a weird book. Didn't super enjoy it, and I definitely won't be continuing with this series just because of that. The 10th book I read this month was Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Noah Yuval Harari. I gave this book like 4.75 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was really interesting. So this book looks at the broad themes and transitions of humans throughout history, from our prehistoric roots starting in Africa when there was other Homo species on Earth, to today and even into the future, and the questions that we'll face as we look at artificial intelligence. And so I really liked how Harari examines different themes and problems that humanity has faced, how humans have dealt with them over the centuries, and then how further questions can be raised from this understanding now. For example, he spends a lot of time discussing the evolution of the market, the evolution of religion, gender differences and how those developed, interactions between different cultures, how humans, for example, became an agricultural species. And I really like how he handled it. It was really well done. I didn't agree with him on everything, but I have a lot of respect for how he wrote and discussed this book in a way that a lot of people can engage with, and a lot of people can understand easily. Because sometimes it is hard with things written by academics to really follow where they're going with things, but he makes that really easy and really clear, and I really liked that. The 11th and final book I read this month was Stay With Me by Adebayo Aobami, and I don't know if I said that right. She's Nigerian. I loved the book though. It was really good. So I gave this book 5 stars. And so this book follows a marriage between Akin, the man, and Yejide, his wife. I listened to this on an audiobook site. I hope I'm close with those names. If not, I apologize. And it's really fascinating because it talks about when they met in college, and then in the present when they are trying to conceive a child, and Yejide is having a really difficult time and she just can't do it. And so it follows the difficulties that they have in their marriage, and in Nigeria, polygamy is a thing that at least happened in the context of this time period. And so because she can't have children, Akin gets a second wife, even though Yejide and Akin had discussed before that they didn't want to have that in their relationship. Under the pressure of his family, Akin marries a second woman named Fumi, and the relationship just gets more complex from here. I really love the way that this book explores family dynamics, and it really looks at the way that Nigerian culture works and Nigerian families operate. As someone who doesn't know a lot about Nigerian culture, it was informative and interesting, yet I never felt that the author was just sitting down and being like, okay, this is what happens in Nigeria, this is the way we do things. I felt like it was handled very well and handled very appropriately with a balance so that people who don't know a lot can understand, but people who do know a lot won't feel patronized. It was done really well. It has a lot of emotional intensity and depth, and I love the twists and turns. I did not predict what was going to happen in the end at all. I wasn't close, and because I listened to it on iBooks, I was walking my dog and listening, and then something happened, and I was like, okay, I think I know where it's going. Because this twist, if you look at this twist, I think this twist will happen, and I was wrong, and I was so shocked. It was so good, and it's a really emotional, impactful book, and I loved it to pieces. It was really well done. It was really well written, and I felt very immersed in Nigerian culture while I read this book, and I felt like I could understand where all these characters came from in their past. And that can be really hard sometimes when you're reading books from another culture that you're not familiar with, but I felt really invested. Of course, since this book has a lot to do with having children, fertility, there's a lot of discussion about sex in this book, so if that's not something you're comfortable with, just beware. This is an adult fiction book that does occur often, and there's a discussion of war there in Nigeria and conflict there, so that's also is not graphic, but if that's not something you want to read about, just be aware. So that's the 11 books I read this month. It was a busy reading month, but I really enjoyed it. I had a good mix of books I liked and I didn't like, and at least that way you know that you're getting a wide variety of books that you're reading. It was really great, and I'm really excited for June and what I'm going to read now in June. Down below, tell me what your favorite book was in May. If you have one, I'd love to hear from you guys. And thank you for watching. It was really good to see you all, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.